Hello, everybody. Welcome to FixFlow webinar, looking at the 2024 Service Charge Index with the Property Institute and what that means to you guys, the block managers. I'm particularly delighted to have Jaclyn Thorburn with me today, because Jack and I go back quite a long way, to put it mildly.
We do.
We've gone through quite a bit together. Before I get started, let me just read the sort of necessary how to interact with us and the legally stuff. So the necessary, I'm afraid, disclaimer, let me read this one out. All content presented in this webinar is intended for general information purposes only and should not be considered as legal advice or official guidance. I'm sure you're all used to hearing that on every webinar you listen to nowadays. Now, this is the important part. If you've got a question, use the Q&A buttons, please, because we do want this to be interactive. I'm sure you've got questions on some of the data, some of the thoughts behind it. Otherwise, you're just going to listen to Jack and I yakking at each other. So much more fun if you interact. So put those through. We'll bring them in when we can. If we can't cover them, don't worry, we'll cover them afterwards. We'll follow up. The session is recorded. So if you want to pop out for a cup of coffee or give somebody else a hint towards it, sorry, I got a bit muffled up there, then you can get it off FixFlow afterwards. So the two speakers we have, myself, Nigel Glen. I am currently, amongst various things I do, non-exec director at Emeria, but I also help FixFlow, particularly about leasehold. And Jack, over to you.
Good morning, everyone. Yeah, I'm Jaclyn Thorburn. I'm Chief Communications Officer at the Property Institute, where I have been, and formerly ARMA, for the last 5.5 years. I work predominantly on external comms, so a lot of policy development work, but also member comms, updating our members on what is happening out there for the industry and what they need to know.
Thanks, Jack. I think you're in the boardroom, aren't you?
Yes.
So what are we going to do today? The topics we're going to look at is, first of all, the overall service charge index. We'll comment on the main findings. Big part of this, how do you explain this to leaseholders? We'll go through the Q&As. There's some, we sort of have some suggestions for you, which we'll come on to as well during the course of the conversation. But let's whiz straight into it. So if I can kick off, Jack, there's been a lot of press recently. It seems to be bubbling up more, actually. I saw some more stuff this morning in the big issue, et cetera, about service charge index. And I think it's great the TPI looked to address this. What did you find, and how are you getting it out to the outside world at the moment in a quick nutshell?
So we've been concerned about service charges rising for a while, but back in February, we decided to actually start looking at the drivers, and we went out to our members and said, give us your service charge data. That gave us a pool of about 108 estates, and we broke it down by all of the main expenditure categories because we wanted to really find out what was going on. A lot of the negative press was putting the blame at the landlord's door, or even worse, at the managing agent's door, saying that there is, ripping off and profiteering and things like that. So we wanted to set the record straight with actual real data.
No, thanks for that. It continues today. I mean, there was an article this morning saying it was on about insurance commissions and, oh gosh, the managing agent puts money on top. And as long as you're reasonable and fair, I don't see a problem with that, because the alternative is, as we're finding out in the Act, that you'll, instead of charging a commission on it, you're going to have to account for it, again, down to transparency. So we're going to bounce around a bit. What about the Act? That's just come through. That was gripping late night watching, or not late afternoon watching on Friday.
I was glued on Friday and all the way sort of into Friday evening, and then saw that it had passed. So obviously we're still in the dark a little bit. There are some things that are going to come through in the next 2 months, but most of it is going to be secondary legislation. For this particular part, obviously the transparency around service charges will be key. There's a lot of provisions around reporting, timescales and things like that that might be a little bit tricky. Looks to be some amends to section 20B that we need to look out for. But for the most part, we'll be looking at that standardized chart of accounts, which might hopefully help leaseholders understand a little bit more. If it's standardized and in a format that they can recognize, it might help them understand what they're actually paying for. I think that's one of the biggest problems at the moment, and that's echoed in the press, is that people don't understand service charges. They don't understand what they are.
But a lot of times, I hate to say, they're not interested.
No.
I'm not being cynical about it. I mean, that was my experience when I was running an agency. Sometimes people would contact and say, "Oh, would you mind explaining?" And I go, "I'd be delighted to. It's your money I'm spending." But 99 times out of 100 didn't. But the standard chart of accounts, I think, is good. That was, I think, born out of our discussions when there was going to be a separate building safety charge, and
Yeah.
the TPI/ARMA/IRPM.
Yeah, it was ARM and IPM definitely tabled that amend. We campaigned, although it would create a separate charging regime, we did think that it was necessary to have a standard chart of accounts, because we knew that a lot of the cost of complying with the Building Safety Act were going to be, fairly opaque. So
Yep.
we felt like that was a good thing. So it's kind of nice to see that coming through in the act.
Yeah, it was a political trade-off, wasn't it? Because if you do the separate building safety charge, there's a lot of costs involved in that. And then the politicians said, well, then how will people know what safety's costing them? And we said, well, why don't you just do a standard charge of accounts? Now, I know it's a pain in the butt short term for managing agents because you'll have to adjust your systems, etc. But think of it longer term. You take over a new property, the accounts are going to be in the exact same format. You'll be able to just, do a comparison from last year to this year really, really easily. So I think there's a bit of short-term pain, but I agree with you. I think it's definitely a good thing longer term. I mean,
Yeah.
we'll see how quickly it has to come in, because obviously you've got to adjust your systems, and you'll be halfway through stuff.
Yeah,
but that's
I think most members have said they would need about 18 months to really get it through on all of their portfolio. So we'll be looking at a lead-in time of about 18 months. So let's see.
Yeah, I think so. So back to the, sorry, we segued across there. Back to the service charge index itself. I mean, I've seen it. I hope everybody on this call has seen it. But do you want to summarize what the sort of big ticket items were, and there's any surprises in there?
Not a huge amount of surprises, I guess, for anybody in the industry. We decided, even though we'd released the service charge data to the BBC as an exclusive, the BBC did run those figures on the weekend. So if you're looking for those, you can find them on the BBC website from Sunday.
Yep.
But when we compared it to a cumulative inflation rate of about 23% over the last 5 years, we did 5 years because we wanted it to be a bit of a benchmark, and 2019 was pre-COVID, pre-energy, quite like more normal times, I guess. So we decided that would be the sort of benchmark. So we found a 41% increase in total service charge costs in the last 5 years. 2023 compared with 2024 was just a 2 or 3% increase. So that has kind of come down a little bit. The biggest rises, no surprise, insurance, 92% increase, and utilities, 72-73% increase. Although the
It'd be useful to have this on the screen.
Come down, yeah.
Yeah. Jonty, have you got that sort of bar graph? That'd be kind of useful. So was it this fella?
Yeah, so there we go.
So that's the one on the left. It's in green, just simply to catch your eye, the inflation rate. But yeah, do you want to talk us through, particularly the one second on the left, which I always found I thought was interesting, to put it mildly.
Yeah, I think this has really helped us with the sort of negative media narrative that it's managing agents that are ripping off leaseholders, and in fact, it's the only category that is increased in the last 5 years below the rate of inflation. I think that speaks to managing agents doing everything they can to actually keep their costs low in lieu of all of these other costs going up. Repairs and maintenance, we know that the construction costs have been going up 4.5% on average every year, predicted to go up another 15% in the next 5 years. So repair and maintenance is a fairly significant increase there. Utilities, as I say, no surprise, we started to see those prices go up from sort of summer 2021. They have come back down, but not to the levels that they were. Professional fees, that was probably the biggest surprise for us. But when we sort of looked into that, it looks like additional auditing fees, fees for surveys to do inspections in relation to cladding and remediation and things like that. That's where some of those costs are coming from, and staff costs as well. That was the other surprise.
And the professional fees, to be fair, the percentage is large, but the absolute is fairly small. We can see that in another graph in a minute. But before we move on, I think something that I find interesting here is if you take out the Ukraine issue, the buildings insurance, and let's ignore the professional fees, everything else is pretty standard, but nearly double inflation. And as you said, whether that's Brexit, all the builders have gone, transport costs. But it is quite striking how similar everything is in terms of its rise.
Yeah.
And we're not alone. I think I contacted friends in Australia and overseas, and they're seeing exactly the same. Canada's going to give us some stats fairly shortly as well, which I'll pass on.
I think even if you're a freehold homeowner and you've been doing renovations or extensions to your house, you'll have seen the same thing. You'll have seen the cost of of labour and materials going up, particularly after the pandemic. Same with your buildings insurance. This is not a unique problem to leasehold. Costs have gone up across the board. It just so happens that it's impacted a lot of the things that service charges are there to pay for.
No, I agree about that. Something which we don't have in here, but I remember looking at this probably in the 2019 was, for me, a very significant and powerful argument about our managing agents, neglecting their duties. So I looked at 250,000 units, and they were roughly 50-50, either resident owned or controlled, so you're talking RTMs, RMCs, etc., or third-party landlord, and looked at the average cost per unit. And you'd expect, if there was some shenanigans going on, that the ones with the landlords would be much, much higher, because that's kind of what they're saying in the press, that landlords are unscrupulous managing agents. But under the careful control of RMCs and RTMs, the average was 2,190, and under the haphazard gouging control of the landlords, it was 2,140. So actually slightly smaller. But to me, that was forget the tenure argument. To me, that proved to me that managing agents were doing the best they could, because it didn't matter who was setting the budgets.
Yeah, exactly.
The costs were coming in the same. And I think that I know you haven't published those sort of stats, but is your feeling it's roughly still the same?
We have done the analysis. So of the 108 estates here, I think it was about 57 estates, so about 60% were resident owned or controlled. And when we looked at the average service charge cost, there was a difference of £200 with those compared to third party landlords. And I think that it's an important thing to keep an eye on, that the government with this new act are talking about making it easier for leaseholders to take over control of their block and manage their budget and all of that, and that will help to reduce costs. The data doesn't actually support that at all. What we might need to look at is reserve funds to see if there's any difference between reserve fund contributions. Maybe that's where some of the differences will come, but certainly on the data that we've pulled together for this one, it doesn't show really any discrepancy. As I say, £200 difference. So.
I get nervous about reserve funds, though, for a few reasons. One, I think if you set them properly, as I'm finding where I live, they're easily the same as your service charges. I think people massively have underestimated in the past, including managing agents, what it costs.
I think they're about a third at the moment. I think it's about 36% on average of the total service charge budget. And what we are concerned about is that those contributions might be being reduced to offset the increase in costs elsewhere, which just stores up problems for later on down the line when you do need to tap into those reserve funds because the roof falls in or the lift needs, completely replacing or something like that. So that's one thing that we do want to try and keep an eye on, is that the reserve funds are actually being topped up properly.
That's a big reason why I get worried about it, because from my own personal experience, you go to a board and say that boiler, £500,000, it needs replacing, and you can just see human nature. I'm using a personal example. The chair of the board thinking, "I'm out of here in 2 years' time. I'm not paying for that." And it's what can we do for £10,000 instead? Just get it ticking over for a while. So what you could see is reserve funds are cheaper under self-managed, but for the wrong reasons. As I say, the example I use, you can save a lot of money on your car by not servicing it, but long term, it's going to be more expensive because the engine's going to seize, etc. So that's why reserve fund, there's not, service charges are what they are, but reserve funds can be gamed and played. So I'm not sure how to get a clear picture out of reserve funds.
Yeah, I think that's something that we're going to do the next time we run this. So this is going to be an annual index, maybe even twice a year we'll do it. But that's definitely something I think we're gonna look into and get a bit more insight on. So yeah.
Okay. Now, John T, we've got the ones with the 3 pie charts. I thought just a quick. Oh, that was quick.
One we prepared earlier.
Exactly, Jack. There's a. I must stress that the size of the pie charts, we did want to make it that the pie chart showed the size of the service charge and how it went up over time. But sorry everybody, it looks a bit weird, so we've had to just do them all the same size. But what you can see is things changing in terms of proportion. Again, Jaclyn, if you've got a couple of comments on that,
yeah, we we can see it. What we talked about earlier was the professional fees, even though they'd gone up by sort of 69%, you can see that it's actually a fairly small 15% proportion of the overall budget. And again, the management fee, if you look at it, is 6%. You know, it's less than 10%. What we have seen, obviously, is on-site staff costs is a big chunk. I think that's quite a surprise to some people. And obviously, the introduction of the Building Safety Act is changing those percentages slightly. So it's not comparing similar things, but repairs and maintenance and general health and safety have increased at a rate that we kind of thought. But I think it's really useful to see what we're talking about. Where in terms of real term growth, yes, but actually as a proportion overall. Yeah, reserve funds. Yeah, you can see 15%.
Yeah.
Sorry, I had it wrong.
The
15%.
And you said you go, and I'm glad you're going to keep doing this. Is that going to be retrospective? Last year the change was, or are you going to try and look forward to? Because I'm just thinking you might be able to help managing agents say, we've talked to our insurance experts, we've talked to our utilities experts, we've talked to our staff site experts, and it's likely overall weighted average that it's going to be 4%. And at least that means they can go to their clients and say, look, it might not be 4, but that's kind of the best industry guesstimate we've got.
I think that is definitely going to be part of it. Is that it's similar to the RICS housing market survey, where they do sentiment in terms of what they expect the market to do. I think that's probably something that we'll do going forward. We did do it to a certain extent with this one, but we just didn't have enough time to crunch the data, and probably didn't collate it in the easiest way. But I definitely think that'll be something. But as I say, we know from the construction industry index that's going to go up 15%. They've already said that over the next 5 years. So that means repairs and maintenance is going to continue to increase. Insurance, we don't know, but certainly, yeah, that's something that we can put some forecasting around that will help people budget.
God, brings back memories when we were doing those COVID time ones, when we were looking at, it's been wet weather in Canada, which means that the wood is soggy, so that's put the price of timber up, and so on and so on. The chain of events is always fascinating about what happens, how you get these sort of unusual changes, what can happen in the world that does this.
And it might be worth us tracking arrears as well. It was something that we did during COVID times as well, because we're seeing a lot of headlines. We're seeing a lot of leaseholders really struggling to pay these service charge costs. Is that going to result in an increase in arrears? And of course, we've got this litigation clause in the new act that isn't really helpful. So it's how all of that is going to sort of play out over the next year or so, I guess.
I think that's a very valid point, because everybody assumes that in a block with hundreds of people, everybody can pay. And if not, and the other assumption, of course, is if not, well, so what? The profit in the service charge can just cover that. Whereas, of course, as we found with press and politicians, they don't understand that service charge is just a cost recovery. And I hate to say, when you say, I've said this in Parliament, there's no profit in it, and people say, oh yes, there is. Managing agents, you get fees out of it, and you go, well, that's not profit. That's that's a service.
It's service.
So it is very frustrating. It is a very sensitive subject, but I do think people really misrepresent and misunderstand the service charges. So I agree. I think a better debate would be, what do we do? There will be people who cannot pay. They're being made redundant. They're having a divorce. What on earth do we do? Because the structure is, at the moment, there's nothing you can do. We know what happens in reality. You dip into reserves, which technically you shouldn't do. You try and put up payment plans. The worst comes to the worst, you go to the mortgagor, but it's not very nice, and it's not very humanistic, is it?
No, it's not. And I think we're also seeing a lot in the media about new buildings, and I think there's a certain element of maybe some developers lowballing new developments in order to sell them, and then suddenly a leaseholder moves in there the first year, the service charge is like £700 a year, and then as more phases in the development get completed, they suddenly see their service charges doubling maybe from year to year, and I think that's a real problem as well.
Yeah, again, you can see it's human nature, whether it's ethical or right or fair. Because if developers are trying to sell their properties, the temptation is to say, no, this one's cheap to run. It's very energy efficient. And, it's only going to be £700. And as you say, next year is almost guaranteed to double. And I'm sure
Yeah.
every managing agent here knows that. When I went out to Australia to learn about strata, at least in Queensland, they have a much more interesting system there. The developers can't set it. So you have
Oh,
to
okay.
bring a third party in who sets it. And that actually levels the playing field. Because if all developers said, look, we'll just do it at the fair and accurate amount, then that would level the playing field because you can't game it. And I thought that was quite interesting and could be something again to suggest into
Mm.
Parliament. An independent firm has to do it. Now, you can always argue how independent is a firm because, as we found out from building safety, it's if you want to carry
Yeah.
on doing work for us, pal, you better look at that figure again. So no system is perfect, but that could be something which is of interest.
Mm. I think that would bring some fairness to it. In the
Mm,
in the immediate term, obviously, it would mean service charges on the face, but would go up. But at least people would have a more realistic thing, and that would come into their affordability calculations when it comes to
yeah.
borrowing money for the property in the first place. So
But asking about I mean, obviously you can't tell us who gave it and how many, etc., etc. But there's always a danger when you see things like staff costs, etc., etc. That's probably a big building.
yeah,
Not many small buildings do. Would it, would it be worth sort of thinking about splitting it into big scary buildings, as Andrew calls them, and your normal, not quite so scary building, i.e., there's no cladding on it, probably doesn't have site staff. Just out of, I don't know if you can split it out of just curiosity, because obviously the ratios will change because you won't have that 29% of on-site staff. But just a
yeah.
thought.
I definitely think there's probably merit in that. Again, because of the time due, we split it between above 18 and below 18. That was the most easy thing to do. But there are certainly a lot of
Hmm,
smaller developments in there that won't have concierges and building managers on site and things like that. So I definitely think once we break that down, and also there'll be regional variations. We've got
yeah.
blocks from all over England and a couple in Wales, I think, as well. As far north, I think, as Newcastle and down to Devon and things like that. So I think when we do regionals, we'll see a difference there, particularly maybe with repairs and maintenance costs, certainly.
Hmm, I can see that. I can see that one.
Yeah.
There was something on service charges and reserve funds. There's something I found fascinating after the Miami tragedy when that block collapsed. I talked to the firm because they have a different system again. They have firms who work out reserve funds. So the
Oh,
managing
okay.
agent doesn't do it. They have firms that go and do it for them. So it's independent, etc., etc. And what was very interesting is they split all their buildings into three different types, sort of low, to be polite about it. So you had only about 30% of the money that you needed for the next 15 years.
Yeah.
Then good, which was 70% up, and then the one in between, the average. But the interesting thing was that in the States, at least, people are attuned to the reserve fund. And what they found was if you looked at the sales price, because they had all the data, they looked at a few
Yeah.
cities, sort of basically overlaid Zoopla, and blocks with 70% plus traded at a 12.5% premium to those at 30% down, which I thought was fascinating because, of course, if you're talking to people about reserve funds, because it is going to be emotive, because you are going to be asking for a lot of money and it is
Yeah.
resented. If you can kind of say, look, if you do that, your flat's going to be in the future, hopefully, will be worth 10% more. And that makes it kind of, all right, well,
It's an
it's an
incentive, isn't
investment.
it? So, yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
The other thing I found really interesting talking to him was, so how do you get started on this? Because, and this will be relevant in the UK, it's pretty unpleasant. I mean, my reserve funds are pretty violent here, um, which is interesting. I'll come on to a side effect of that. But what he said was, you start just charging the fair amount. And we all know how to work that out. A lift is 60,000, last 15 years, 4,000. Roof, 250,000, 25 years, 10,000 a year. And you do that, and then you just ask people for that. Now, of course, that means you don't build it up quickly in the first few years, but it gets
Yeah,
people used to that's my fair
having to
share.
pay it.
And
Yeah,
when I sell, I've put my fair share in. Um, because again, people get a bit piffy about that. It's, well, I put money into the reserve fund and I'm leaving. It's, yeah, but you've used that lift for 10 years.
yeah.
you know, you should actually pay
And
2/3
actually,
of the maintenance.
you'll get some of that back because there'll be an uplift in value of your flat when you come to sell it.
If people recognise,
Yeah,
I'm not sure
if
if
we can
people
ever
figure
move
that
to
out
that.
yet. Yeah, but that was a social thing that people sort of started realizing that there was a cost attributed to it, which I thought was really, really, really interesting.
There's nothing. I don't think there's anything in the new Act on reserve funds at all. Actually,
There was talk about making them implying them into the leases to make them mandatory.
yeah.
I remember that because I remember the officials in DLUC as it was saying, "How can you possibly calculate reserve funds?" And going, "Well, we do it all the time. You know, it's a bestie
What we
guesty."
did, yeah.
Sorry, now we got some. Oh, fair share equals wear and tear. Anonymous attendee. Yeah, basically. But what we're saying here is how you explain it, because if you're going to put a reserve fund on, you are going to get a kickback.
Yeah.
And at the moment, dear friends on this call, make sure your lease says you can do it, because there were court cases where, you know, the managing agent put in a reserve fund thinking it was a responsible thing to do, and some people pointed out, no, you can't. It's not allowed in the lease, and had to give it back. Um, ooh,
Wacky world of leasehold, as Cass says.
so Gavin, read the percentage per schedule heading page. What was the uplift percentage year to year between 2019 to 2024? Yeah, the pies would be bigger. So basically, 2019 to 2024, what was the overall
we
increase?
don't have the index. The only data that we have is 2019, 2023, and 2024.
Yeah.
So we don't have the years in between. I will say actually that all of this data, the narrative, there's a nice infographic, is all available in the public domain on the TPI website.
Yep.
I can publish the link in the chat if
Please
that
do
would
it,
be
because
helpful. Yeah.
that's a good thing. It was 43 overall, wasn't it, between the two? I seem to remember.
43%,
Yeah.
but just 3% in the last year.
Yeah. As we say, some things have come down. So hopefully, Gavin, that I would recommend everybody downloads and reads the TPI one. And you know, if you're getting trouble from leaseholders saying why are things going up, that's why the TPI's done it. To start defending managing agents against the press and the MPs, but also for you guys to be able to say, look, this is what's happened. It's not just me or as a managing agent or your block. We're all suffering from this.
Yeah. Sorry,
Oh.
I've tried to post that in the chat, but I think it's only gone to panelists, so I don't know if John can
Well, John,
pass
you
it
can.
into the
Yep.
into the main chat for everybody. But yeah, this data is out there, and I guess we'll come on to this. But the reason we published it is so that hopefully it's a helpful tool and narrative to explain to clients and to leaseholders about why these costs are going up, why their bills are going up, and explain what they're paying for and what their what their rights are in terms of challenging it and things like that.
Well, that leads me neatly to setting one up for you. Has this gone out to the outside world? And if so, where has it been shown?
It has. So we started pulling the narrative together in February, like I say, and then we were contacted by a senior news producer at the BBC, and he has done some filming around this, and he finally published a piece on Sunday. So he had the data exclusively. We took the decision to publish this data in April to our members. We didn't do any other media on it because we wanted to give the BBC the exclusive, but we felt like it was important for this to be out in the public domain, particularly during the passage of the bill being debated and things like that. We wanted to get some truth out there and to try and help control the sort of toxic media narrative. But the plan is now that BBC piece has gone live, we will be pushing this out. We might even have time to go into depth and have a look more at some of the specific buildings and breaking down maybe the reserve funds and looking at, you know, smaller buildings versus larger, more complex buildings and things like that. So we've got the time now to actually break down the data. It is a relatively small data sample. I think we had 11 contributors and 108 estates. Next year, we want to just absolutely go as far and wide with this as possible so that we've got, you know, more data. But we'll be pushing this out as much as possible. And I actually just did a BBC interview on BBC Radio Bristol this morning around this. So this is something that's going on across the country. We did BBC Politics East programme last week, so this is affecting leaseholders across the country. So, and I think once this BBC piece has gone out, I think it's only going to pick up interest. As you said, Nigel, you know, the big issue, I've done 2 articles on leasehold recently, and service charges in particular. So we really want to get it out as far and wide as possible.
No, good for you, because I feel that managing agents are getting a bum rap here. I'm sure, as in all industries, I'm sure somebody somewhere is taking the mickey. I kicked people out of Armour because of that. Not many, but on the whole, the vast majority of managing agents are doing their very hardest to keep service charges under control.
With the Building Safety Act, I know that obviously the building safety manager role was something that didn't end up happening. Potentially that was a good thing, but it was pushed back because of the cost of it. But ultimately, those duties still exist. And what we found is that managing agents are having to pick up those duties, not necessarily as an accountable person or a principal accountable person, but they're having to support their app or PAP in doing a lot of this work after having done the remediation bit as well, and applying for funds, and doing the developer remediation contracts and things like that. So managing agents have had a heck of a lot of new things to contend with and to deal with, and so to see that their fee has not even increased, above inflation, is quite shocking, really. But they are doing a profession and a half at the moment, I think. And we've only just started seeing the Building Safety Act costs coming through. The 2024 costs are budgeted. It's about £177 per leaseholder in 34 states that are attracting costs this year. But
and to be clear, that's not the cost of the physical work, is it? That's the surveys,
preparing the safety cases, doing the gap analysis, registering the building, providing the key building information. That was all done last year. But then obviously buildings are now starting to be called forward by the regulator. So it's, resident engagement strategy, mandatory occurrence reporting, and of course the safety case report and all of the golden thread. It's investment in, building safety management systems and things like that.
You mentioned earlier about bad debts on service charge. And we looked at that, I remember, in COVID, because they go to give the government to steer. There's some, to quote Castanelli, bonkers stuff going around. I think Sadiq Khan did one that, we must cap service charges. That's the only way to control them. And, the discussion there is, well, I'd love to know who sets the cap, because, is it the managing agent? Well, what's the point of doing that? Is it the block? They might they're incentivized to give an artificial cap. But what happened, it just shows a fundamental misunderstanding of how service charges work, because what do you start turning off once you reach that cap? Do you fire the site staff because they're 29%? Do you let them go on holiday for 5 months unpaid? Turn the utilities off, or cancel the building's insurance? It's that sort of rhetoric which is disturbing, because it's seen from, frankly, politicians and press alike, which is where TPI comes in to try and educate those people on both sides about this. It's not like that.
No, to be honest, I think Sadiq Khan went one step further and said that they should be able to go on strike, which is really not helpful. And I think this is one of the reasons why we did the index, because it's, they're conflating service charge, like real expenditure, real costs, with managing agent fees, and the two are just not the same. And so to break it down, I think even Phil Hendry at the BBC was quite surprised by the amount of data that we provided and what the service charge actually covers. I think he started off thinking it was one way, and then he got this data and was like, oh, okay, I see the problem. But it's like you say, what do you do? There are some buildings out there that during the peak of the building safety crisis, they couldn't get insurance. They just couldn't get it. Rob Mayo says, if you even mention the word flammable or cladding or fire safety defect, you go from a pool of about 600 insurers to about 3 or 4 at best.
Yes,
and that's where the costs are, insane. And I know 92% sounds a lot. There are some costs that haven't gone up at all. There are some costs that have gone up even more. That's the danger of averages and having a small data set. I know ABI has got the reinsurance scheme. We're yet to see if that's actually going to do anything to bring the premiums down. I don't know yet.
Yeah, that's a sore point with me because Rob Mayer and I sat next to the Secretary of State and gave him that scheme 4 years ago, and he didn't pick it up, and now
Yeah,
it's been touted as anyway. Yes, sore point.
yeah.
the
We'll move on.
yeah. Couple more questions. Simon chatted the show needs to thanks. I think that's the response to you saying you put it in chat. So
Yeah.
Jonty's brought that across. Would the TPI, over to you, Jack,
Mm,
look to do a collaborative article with the Law Society over the need and benefit of reserve funds?
absolutely, yes.
I don't know if that person actually has people in the Law Society or if that's just a sort of a general one.
Yeah, definitely. Get in touch with me. I'd love to have a chat around that. As I say, now that we've got the index out there, it might be that we go back to the data and start looking at reserve funds and how that varies.
hmm.
I think we did a white paper on this, didn't we, Nigel, back in Armour days on reserve reserve funds.
We did, and there's a couple of other papers which you reminded me of there. Janie
Mm,
Strange
yeah,
resuscitated educating Rita, and then there was that one we did a long time ago of sorry everybody if it's Jack and I going down memory lane.
educating Rita.
um, we did that one on what does a managing agent do,
Yeah,
which
that
I
was one
think
of our most downloaded PDFs and advice notes.
yeah, which hopefully explain to people why. Because I always found that when I was explaining what do you actually do for the money, and it would be things like, by the way, there's millions of invoices that get paid and reconciled and banked, etc.
Mm,
You never see that. That's all happens like the old proverbial swan pedaling away like crazy underneath. So yeah, maybe looking at it's up to you, the educating readers, as Janie says,
yeah.
dusting those off and just freshening them up a little bit
Well,
could be an idea.
I mean, we were hopeful that because the how to rent guide is now, is mandatory. We've been campaigning to get the how to lease guide made mandatory.
Mm.
Firstly, get it updated, which I think it is now, but make that mandatory at the point of somebody even inquiring about purchasing a leasehold property. You have to do it when you're renting. So, I think leasehold is way more complicated, I think, than the private rental sector. So why not make that mandatory?
Yeah, it is frustrating, isn't it? That we're being the sector's being used as a bit of a punch bag, and yet things that the sector's asking for, like the new RICS code that Jeff was working on
Yeah, the fourth edition.
2 or
Well,
3 years
we
ago.
should be on about the seventh edition by now, I reckon.
Yeah,
But yeah.
and Roper, all these things that
Mm.
that the industry is asking for. And okay, there's a cost for a regulator, but fine, you can work your way around that. Just isn't happening, which is very, very frustrating.
Yeah, they were tabled at the very quick wash up session on Friday. We had Lord Young of Cookham asking about regulation and asking about at least minimum competency standards or mandatory qualifications,
Mm.
as we're seeing in the social housing sector. And unfortunately, none of those were moved. Although we don't know anybody that hasn't said that it's a good thing. And I think, in fact, a lot of politicians are actually surprised that us as an industry want regulation. That seems to be a surprise to them. But there are those kind of, we like to call them rogue agents, but there are those that are creating a bad reputation for the rest of us. And I think regulation will weed those out, to use that analogy of, we want to be a fence at the top of the hill rather than an ambulance at the bottom of the valley.
Yeah, I mean, as I said, I did kick a couple of firms out. They're still trading. Nothing I can do about that.
Yeah.
So no, I would agree with that. And it's odd, isn't it, in the sense that government seems to pursue things which you look at them and go, if you don't mind me saying so, sir, that's bonkers. And you have to try and explain to them why it's bonkers. And yet other stuff where the industry is going, yes, we've got the model, we've done it, we're self-regulated, it's all ready to go, we want it, everybody's behind you, we'll cheer. And they ignore that. It's kind of, I always find that a bit strange. Anyway, I'm sorry, we off to the side a little bit there. Francis, is there any benchmark that can be used for reserve funds, i.e. percentage of building costs, that could be used in the absence of a proper lifetime costs analysis? I'm guessing no on the data at the
No,
moment.
no.
But that might come
No.
out of the next one if you start getting reserve funds.
Yeah, I think if we start getting, we want data on a mass scale for next time, and it might not even be next year. It might be before the end of this year that we repeat this exercise on a mass scale. But certainly, if we do get that, it's in everybody's interest for us to publish that. As I say, we've got 2019 data, so if we can pull that out and it shows something interesting, then we can do that. We have to be careful around fees and things like that, but certainly I don't see any reason why we couldn't publish something on reserve funds.
But not sure where you're quite coming from there, Francis, because every building is different. And the purpose of a reserve fund is to cover the expected cost for that building, so that there's kind of no substitute to have a professional surveyor. Because I was a managing agent, I wouldn't be able to tell how long a roof had left. But get a professional surveyor to do a PMP. So for that building, it costs I don't know, couple of thousand, depends on the size of the building, I guess. But that gives you the basis, and also the basis to plot the reserve funds, because as you know, you sort of look at it and then you kind of go, well, if we're going to be doing scaffolding up, let's get the windows done at the same time. You move stuff around, but it also means you can go to the leaseholders when they say, why are you charging me this extra £5,000? You can go, well, here, this is what it's going to be used for. It's not something picked out of the sky. I was guilty of that. I was an RNC director, and we just went, well, let's call it 1,000 per unit of in the old blocks and 500 quid per unit in the new blocks. It was completely random, and it turns out it was nowhere near what was needed. Simon, it will be useful to break data into categories. Oh, okay. So what Simon's doing is asking for a bit more granularity, which is based on pretty much size. So sub 50 plus 50, with or without lifts, concierge. I know what you're saying, Simon. The problem is you need a lot of data to be able to start breaking it down.
Yeah, we were very much on a tight time scale with the BBC, but also we just wanted to get some information out. We do have a breakdown on these buildings in terms of the building height and the number of homes, the number of units. And I think maybe if they have a heat network, and that was probably about all the supplementary information other than the expenditure categories and costs that we asked for. So we could say all the buildings sub 50 units, here are the average costs, and do it that way if that would be useful. We refrained from doing per leaseholder cost because we felt like that was just like red rag to a bull, saying if we came out with average leaseholder cost, the leaseholder could just say, well, you're charging me more than the average, you're ripping me off. And that is always the danger with using averages, particularly on a fairly small data set.
Or using actual pounds, shillings, and pence. That breaks me, doesn't it? Percentages are better. But I mean, what's nice about providing this data is it does a lot. It shows an interest. It's refuting what's happening in the press and to the MPs, supporting the managing agents, but also, something which I've always long advocated is for managing agents to become less reactive and more proactive. So to take, if you can, this data and start overlaying it on your own portfolio and saying, at this site, utilities is 50% rather than the average. Is that right? Maybe there's something going a bit funny on that one, or it looks about right. So I think data is everything when trying to do analysis, and I think that would be very, very helpful for that. So you've got the charts available. Following on from Simon, you want to start breaking it down a bit more. Think it'd ever be, I suppose you can't really do Excel spreadsheets, or else people will start chewing it around and so forth.
Well, I mean, we did start. This was based on Excel spreadsheets. It was the quickest way we could get the information in, and it was just a lot of manual number crunching and pivot tables. When we do this going forward, hopefully it'll be a little more slick, so that not only is it easier for members to give us the data, but it's then easier for us to manipulate it and identify trends and percentages and analysis and averages and things like that. But yeah, I think along with the data, there is also the narrative that if you can find on that link. So there's the infographic, there's the full index, but the narrative is also important because that speaks to the drivers behind. Okay, so insurance has gone up 92%. Why?
Yeah.
Labor, repairs and maintenance has gone up, but why? So I think it's that narrative that explains it. So it doesn't matter what kind of building you have, whether it's in line with the average or not, the costs are going up, and this is why they are going up.
And do you use the TPI partners for that? You go out to
in fact, and some of our members have also used this exercise as a means to benchmark all of the contractor services as well. When we started looking at when we started to look at professional fees and where that was, they started to look at cleaning companies, gardening, maintenance contractors, and they were like, actually, let's find out what's going on there. And they used that as their own internal exercise to review their own contractors and costs and things like that. So I think that was that was a useful exercise for them.
No, well,
But
it's
yeah,
it's good to challenge, isn't it?
Mm.
Because then
But
when
yeah,
again, it's data.
I think that the biggest thing at the moment is obviously the Building Safety Act costs. We've only just started to see that come through. It's really not helpful that Gove has made statements like, you know, leaseholders will not pay or must not pay. You know, obviously he was referring to remediation there, but even with the leaseholder protections, the Building Safety Fund, and, you know, the developer's remediation contract, there's still a lot of buildings out there that, you know, have not been remediated and have no funding options at the moment. I think the latest statistics are like 900 buildings have had funding, have had remediation completed out of nearly 4,500.
And
You
there'll be
know,
the social one.
it's really slow, and I think 1,000 are maybe started on site, which leaves another 3,000 buildings that are still unsafe or have some kind of defect. And that's buildings over 11 meters. But now with the new compliance, and I'm not suggesting that we put costs ahead of, you know, residents' safety, you know, but this act, it does come at a cost. The impact assessment wasn't really that helpful. The first one was woefully inaccurate. The second one that came out last year was based on 2019 figures. So we already know that we can add at least 23% onto those figures, but I'm still
For
not
managing
sure
agents
that
alone.
well, exactly, and
Yeah,
I'm
for
still,
the rest
and I'm
40.
yeah, exactly, and I'm not sure that that was really that helpful. And I think our, as I say, £177.60. That's just the start of it. It's a whole new regime.
Now, the best thing you can have here is more data. So I don't know. I'm guessing you're just restricting it to TPI firms. There's going to be a load of them on this call at the moment.
Yeah.
How do you want them to contribute? And if so, how can they contribute? Because the more and more you get, because then you'll get, you know, following Simon's thing, you'll be able to get smaller blocks, etc. I mean, I never had I think my biggest block was 135 units. So I had much smaller ones, so I could give good data down there. None of them had cladding, thank goodness, etc., etc. How do you want firms, and how can firms interact and provide you with this data?
I mean, definitely, yeah, definitely. We are working out how to get this data on a mass scale, potentially through suppliers of the invoicing system, the accounting system. Now there's all kinds of data issues there and GDPR and things like that, but we're looking to get this on a mass scale so that we get it at source, redacted, obviously, at source, so that then we can take that data. But if you're interested in contributing, just let us know. But we will be doing a call out to members, I think, to say this is what we're planning to do. Let us know.
I think, you know, to stress to everybody, one of the great advantages of having something like the TPI is you do it anonymously and redacted. So if you put your data in, nobody says, oh, and this comes from, you know, Nigel Glen Property Management, who's obviously worse than the others because the increases are higher. It just goes into the pool, and that's a way to get data to the press, politicians, etc., which has been collected, collated, sorted, and then anonymized. And everybody always says, oh, can we have the raw data? Or certain, shall we say, groups do. And the answer is always no, because then people won't be confident to hand over their data.
Yeah, and I think the BBC started off by writing to some managing agents saying, can you give us your income on service charges and your profit on service charges, which just spoke to the lack of understanding. And so it was like, well, give us your data and we'll pass it on to the BBC for you, all collated, all anonymized, you know, it's all, there's no individual data. They never asked for the raw data, to be fair. They never asked to see proof of our sources at all.
And do you think when you went on the Beeb and when Andrew did, were the Beeb sort of a little more understanding of maybe it's not quite as not quite the spin they put on the first time around? Spin's a hard word. How they perceived it, because you know they're talking to disgruntled people who are obviously saying I'm being ripped off.
Yeah, absolutely, and you know that's the media's job. It's the human interest story. So obviously they're gonna speak to leaseholders who are distressed or unhappy or unable to pay or unable to sell their flat for various reasons. And we had the same during the building safety crisis. But I do think there was a little bit of turnaround there in terms of him having seen the data. again, surprised that it was an industry that wanted regulation, that wanted some kind of, minimum competency standards at very least. I think the insurance industry has probably a lot to answer for. I think he was less keen on the responses that they gave, but I do think there is a signal that maybe this index has helped turn the tide a little bit. There's still a long way to go, but I think this will help. And we can't, these are costs that we can't really control. So we empathise, but we can't,
I don't think insurance is ever going to come back down.
Yeah, the members can't do their job for free. They're providing a professional service, and they should be paid for it.
No, fairly recompensating. You know how I feel. Know how I feel on that one. Another question came in. There is a question at the top, which Syed, I'm not ignoring it. I just don't know what the answer is, to be honest. Talking about insurance premium commissions, can a head lessee paying the service charge ask a managing agent to pay back insurance commission back to the head lessee? Bit of a legal one, though. I don't feel qualified to answer that one, to be honest.
I'm not sure. Yeah, that's a kind of I think we probably need a legal.
That's one for Cass, and it's probably what's in your contract as well, to be quite honest.
What we have had is a lot of people asking if they can pass the inflated insurance premiums onto the developer. If you've got a pledged developer on a site, if they're paying to fix the buildings, then they should be paying for all of the associated costs that have come around since that building was declared, unsafe. Not sure that that's something that government are going to go for, or many developers will stick their hands up and do. Maybe some of them have. But the worrying thing is that even on these remediated buildings, we're not seeing the costs coming down, the insurance premiums coming down by much, even though they're supposed to be remediated. A lot of them, they've been remediated on the outside, but they've still got internal issues and risk mitigation measures and things like that. So it's not really making a huge difference to the premiums. But
I'm not trying to defend insurers, but their business model is different, isn't it? The developers will say, we've remediated it and everybody will escape alive. And the insurers are going, well, that's terribly nice, but the whole thing's going to burn to the ground anyway.
The building will burn to the ground, yeah.
So my risk profile is very different.
And also, the cost of rebuilding it have gone up because we know construction costs are going up. So
another 40% on that. So I'm not defending insurers. I can understand. I take with a pinch of salt the assertion that the insurers didn't realize how much money they were losing on resi. I just can't believe giant industries don't look at their data in that level of granularity and go, ooh, resi's a bit cruel. But I can understand them sort of saying, well, forget fire, it's water. Particularly push fit has driven an awful lot because in the old days you used to put copper pipes in and solder them in, and they would last forever, whereas push fits, as we know, don't. And water, as everybody on this thing knows, is the bane of our lives because it goes everywhere and destroys everything.
95% of claims is escape of water.
Yeah. But we're talking utilities. July, that should come down. Oh, one thing I keep hammering away at this because I still hear it now. People say, "Oh, why don't we convert communal systems to domestic rate away from commercial rate?" No, do not want that. It only at the beginning of the Ukraine war did commercial rise above resi. And it was there for about 2 months, then it popped down again. So you are getting maybe, I think it's 20-30% discount off domestic, and you're not paying VAT, best of both worlds. So everybody who's on the call, commercial is much better than domestic rate.
But the one thing that would make a difference is to be able to lock in a tariff for longer than a year. That's what we need to be able to get to as long-term qualifying agreements. I think that would make a real difference.
So carving utilities out of long-term qualifying agreements. I agree with you on that. Now you'll always lose. Nobody's going to ring you up and say, "Well done for keeping the price down." They'll go, "You've locked us in for 3 years and it's gone down, you idiots." But what it does do is, as you say, is give that level of stability. I think we talked about this. I remember being on a call with the government. They said, "Oh no, you don't need to do that because this thing called the first tier tribunal where you can get dispensation." And honestly,
we spoke to Siobhan and we spoke to the FTP about this, didn't we? About dispensation.
Yeah. How would you like to do? You got to do it within 24 hours and about 10,000 a year. I think that was banging my head on the desk at that stage. Couple more questions. So, Lauren, with regard to reserve collection, have you reviewed the reserve collection level relative to the age of the building and historic collection levels?
No.
Again, no. Over to you. I'm guessing no, because that's a lot of data to try and sift, isn't it?
Yeah.
Again.
One of the things that we didn't ask in this data set was the age of the building. So I'm just making a note of
Yep.
that because it's a very good point. But yeah, the age of the building I think would be really crucial to that. And I think maybe if we do something with the Law Society, maybe that's one of the things that we could look into, I guess, as well, because that, I guess, that will play a key role, wouldn't it?
That would be interesting if you track building service charges by how old they are.
Yeah.
You might see, as we saw, it's going to zip up in the first few years, and then as the optimism, shall we say, of the developers is taken into account, that would be quite interesting, and that would be a different graph you get out of that. Ross, with regard to the BBC, can you read these, Jack? I don't want to read them out to you.
Yeah.
No, yeah, actually, I'll read them out because then everybody else can hear them. So Ross is saying, with regard to the BBC article dated 27th of May 2024, my flat service charge has doubled to £8,000. Is there a reason why BBC left out the management fees pillar off the TPI's infographic? Doesn't make good press, I think. A reference is made to man fees not exceeding inflation in the article, but is not displayed in the infographic. Just wondering if it's selective journalism to reflect the current mood music or something less cynical. Jack, you're a communications officer.
I think.
Do you want to burn your bridges with the journos?
No, I mean, fair play. Yeah, no, I think it was a bit of selective journalism there. Overall, I think the piece is fairly balanced. It's the most balanced I've seen an article on service charges from the BBC in a while. So I think, we're taking small steps. We're not quite there yet, but now that data is out there on the BBC, we've then now got the opportunity to do what we want with it. So we will definitely be hammering that stuff home. We'll be using it to hook into our election manifesto, which will be launching next week. So we'll use the service charge index as a hook to say this is what we're asking the next government to do and things like that. So there are lots of better immediate opportunities coming our way.
Do you see one of our ex-board members is standing as an MP? Max.
No, I didn't.
Maxine Fothergill is standing as a Reform MP in Bexley.
Wow.
I don't know if you're on this, Max, but I wish you all the best. I'm not a Reform supporter. I'm staying out of that, but I'm just wishing Max as a friend. Now, so we've touched briefly. What sort of things can managing agents do with this data apart from, obviously go to their leaseholders and say, it's not just me, it's the big bad world out there. Is there anything, and we've said that maybe a bit of comparisons might help if they can look at their own, any other sort of thoughts of how to make the data useful on a practical day-to-day basis?
I mean, I think it's about, looking at the narrative as well. If you compare it and benchmark it to your own data, and if it's much in line with that, then I think that's something that you need to make leaseholders aware of. It's also maybe a good thing to brief all your staff and make sure your staff have read the narrative and understand this service charge piece, and maybe have an internal briefing note to help people explain it. It's unfortunate. There'll be a lot of people who are, distressed by the fact that they can't afford their service charges, but I think short of looking at it and helping explain why costs are rising, it's difficult. Or it could be an opportunity for you to, like one of our members did, is to actually look at some of your costs, some of your contractors, and start comparing and start looking at, okay, where could I possibly bring some of these costs down for next year?
Yeah, I think when I first started in this business, we took over one block, and I remember, I don't know if others do, but we looked at the last 3 or 4 years of accounts. And this data again would help you with that, because what we found was electrical repairs were going crazy, and dug into a little bit, and it was operational. So the managing agent had said to the residents, if you find a bust light bulb, let the concierge know. Now, the concierge didn't know any better than to ring up an electrician. So that was 200 quid call out charge. But that came to light by looking at looking for the trends, which is what I'm saying. That's why your data is valuable, because you can look at it and say, mine's out of kilter with that. And the answer there was to say the concierge, yeah, collect them. Then once every month we'll bring in the £200 an hour man.
Bring in, yeah.
And then the second stage was, in those happy days when you could, the cleaning staff will have a bunch of light bulbs, and as they go around, they can just screw you one in. But that's why I think this sort of data, again, I'm on my hobby horse about being a proactive managing agent rather than just pay a bill when it comes in. Look at what's happening in your properties, which is obviously what people are doing, because otherwise we wouldn't have seen, the imbalance. Yeah. We would have seen an imbalance between where residents own it and obviously scrutinize a lot more. So another quickie one. So on age, the age is the correct lever to look at on reserves. Leaseholders keep on telling me off that mine never compares with their neighbours. Yep, I advised I'm happy to review what the other development has produced, and note you can't compare apples with fish fingers. It's always at the point the arguments fall away and the contrast data never materializes. Yeah, that's from Anonymous. I agree with you there. I say my 50 sites or our 50 sites were all run by leaseholders. And only once, I think, did a board say, we've looked around at the new developments near us that are springing up. We look tatty. We need to spend a lot of money on this block. And I nearly fell off my chair, because they were absolutely right. Went around down like a lead balloon with people, of course, because not everybody's the same. I've just sold mine. I really don't need a big bill, because I'm never going to get that back. But no, age would be, I think, a very interesting thing to put on that.
So it would be useful.
Yeah, so you got age, a couple of height classifications, maybe was cladded or was involved in cladding, and then
we've got that data as well.
Yeah, lifts concierge. So you're starting to get to small pots. The problem is the more you split it up, the less accurate the data becomes.
Yeah, because you end up with a smaller set, which is why we really want to go large scale with it. If we look at our membership database, you're talking about 55,000 blocks. That's a heck of a lot of data. That's over 1 million leasehold units. So that would be some really, really robust data that you can't really argue with once it's out there. So and we can even get half of that. That would be good.
And for the people listening, support your local TPI, because without that data, they can't do what they're doing here, which is going out to bat on your behalf for the press and the government to get better legislation. So again, I think it's great that you've done all of that. Oh, and I'm terrible timekeeping. We are now at 12 o'clock. Jack, this is our first time we've actually done this together, believe it or not, and it's been great.
It's a bit of a role reversal. It used to be the other way around, didn't it?
It did. Well, I hope everybody enjoyed it. I personally didn't. I think that data is a great job and is doing good work out in a rather difficult world at the moment.
Yeah, we've only just really started, and we've got ambitions. We're already seeing it helping a little bit, so that's why we want it to get bigger and better in the next year or so. So yeah, any comments, any feedback, let me know.
And you can see on the screen you got the QR codes for Jack and myself. Yeah. So Jack's the more important one on the right hand side, and the next one is a fixed one. Say all this is recorded. It will be available, so you can catch up on it. Don't worry about it in the slides. We will make sure that a link to the TPI, if that's right with you, Jack, that Fixler sends out a link to the TPI document on it. And say, don't just read the narrative, download the document. There's a lot more data in it in that. Okay, everybody. Well, thank you very, very much for your time. And Jack, again, a delight.
Yeah, thank you very much, Nigel.
See you soon.
Enjoyed it. See you all soon. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.